and what the impacts might be. I know you might not know 100%, but what you're looking at for Edina Public Schools.
Okay, well, I'll get started maybe with the policy part of the change. And so in Minnesota, public employees have the right to organize into bargaining units under the Public Employees Labor Relations Act, commonly referred to as PELRA. And PELRA also defines what is considered a term and condition of employment. And terms and conditions of employment are considered mandatory subjects of bargaining. One of the policy changes that came out of this most recent session is that staffing ratios were added as a term and condition of employment. Prior to this, the number of personnel that a public employer employs, it was actually considered an inherent managerial right. And that has been changed under this new policy to whereas staffing ratios, it's no longer an inherent managerial right, meaning that it's now the subject of a mandatory subject of bargaining. So staffing ratios apply to all public employees and of course all school district employees. The policy change also went one step further in the case of school employees and added adult to student ratios in classrooms and student to personnel ratios to terms and conditions of employment. And in Edina, for many years, the school board has approved the class size, adult to student ratios, class size, minimum and maximums within our school district, but those things will now also be the subject of bargaining. The last thing that was added under terms and conditions of employment is actually student testing, which is something that hasn't been part of a mandatory subject of bargaining in the past. Maybe I'll ask Director Woodard to actually talk about what financial impact.
Yeah, the financial impact at this point is, as Director Shaw mentioned, is relatively unknown. We're still gathering data and making our best projections. Sonia covered the rest of the material very eloquently and comprehensively. I'll just add that I believe that e-learning days and how we operate those as a district are also a term and condition. And also those terms and conditions apply to all bargaining units. I think the teachers' unions are getting the headlines for this one, but it applies to all groups.
Great, thank you. The next piece, I believe, will go to both of you as well, has to do with unemployment insurance.
Okay, so maybe I'll get started again on the policy side of that. So prior to May 28th, 2023, when this new law went into effect, school term employees in the state of Minnesota, so people that work 9 or 10 months per year, have not been eligible for unemployment insurance during the summer months. And that was changed during this last legislative session, specifically for non-instructional employees. And what we're hearing in the news a lot is hourly employees, that's the language that they're using. But DEED, which is the agency that oversees unemployment, has been very clear that what they are looking at it as instructional employees and non-instructional employees within a school district. And so non-instructional employees will be eligible to apply for unemployment during the summer term. Of course, Unemployment Minnesota decides whether or not they are eligible. That is not something that our school district has any authority to make that determination. So in a school district, that non-instructional employees typically means our paraprofessionals, whether classroom paraprofessionals or special education paraprofessionals, our bus drivers. We have 9 and 10 month clerical positions within the school district. We also have health service associates within the school district that work on a school term schedule. And then although in Edina, we subcontract for nutritionalist services employees, in many school districts that would also include nutritional food service employees as well. And so what that means is that after the school year ends, the people that fall in this category can apply for unemployment, like unemployment works for all other employees throughout the state. And then, of course, assuming that they don't have another job in the summer, which may prevent them from receiving unemployment, they'll likely be eligible for that as well.
And that includes community education.
It does
Some
include
community
some
education
community
staff as well.
education. Absolutely, Dr. Stanley. So our 9-month community education employees.
Yeah, so the way unemployment works in terms of the compensation to the individual seeking that assistance, it's based on their average weekly wages for the previous calendar year for a maximum of 12 weeks. Most employees will receive about 50% of their weekly wage to a maximum of $857 per week, again for the 12 weeks. And that would also apply to winter break and spring break, I believe, and not just the summer terms. The district's maximum exposure per the eligible employee groups would probably be around $1.2 to $1.4 million. The state did appropriate a $135 million fund to compensate school districts for this. That fund is supposedly meant to last to fiscal year 2027. Whether that's true or not, or whether that will be enough funds is to be determined.
Thank you both. My last item was the Paid Family Leave Act, and I'm not sure who is the best person to talk about that. Maybe you, Dr. Saylor?
Yes, I can speak to the policy portion of this. So this one is set to go, this new law is set to go into effect on January 1, 2026. So we still have a little time to figure out all the details. But it really, the idea is, and they've been talking about this in the state for a number of years now, is to set up a system that's similar to unemployment insurance for people to apply for wage benefits when it's necessary for them to miss, be absent from work for having a baby, taking care of a family member, for their own serious medical condition. Those are the largest ones. Follows along very closely with the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is a federal act. However, this, of course, provides wages as well. The FMLA, the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, provides for job protection, and it provides for your employer must continue your insurance, just like you were working, but is actually unpaid leave. It doesn't provide any wage replacement during that time. And so the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, the Minnesota law, actually also provides wage replacement in a very similar manner to unemployment insurance. And it's the maximum length of paid benefits annually for an employee would be 20 weeks with a qualifying event. And the qualifying event would have to be at least 7 days absent. And then all employees would be eligible for this benefit after they've worked for the employer for 90 days.
In terms of the financial impact, the way this works is the state's going to set up a trust, and the trust will be funded by employer and employee payroll deductions. And so the maximum contribution from the employer will be 0.7% of all taxable wages that the employer pays out. So for this school district, that's going to be about $830,000 per year, potentially, that we would have to contribute to this trust.
Thank you. So we know that there are, specific education-related pieces of legislation that happen, but this is good examples of how other parts of what is happening over at the Capitol will also affect our schools. And I didn't know, we're not going to have a budget conversation now, but I wonder if it would be helpful to just kind of explain the time frame of when things are going to be shown to the board as we're in budget planning mode right now.
Absolutely.
Timeline.
If you refresh the board book tomorrow at about noon or before end of day, you'll see a budget document that details our BERG process, what happened at the legislative session, and also each of our funds depicted in the governmentally accepted accounting principles in that format. So all those details should be available tomorrow, and there was some information presented at last week's special meeting, so check that out as well.
Thank you. So at this time, I'll open it up for questions. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand. We'll be very informal about this. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about this ratio staffing regarding the class sizes. So who's gonna, I understand that now is the board that decide. And now will be depending on if they unionize or how it will, who will decide the size of the classes now?
So ultimately, the school board approves the collective bargaining agreement that's brought before them. So the way it works is with all different employee groups within the school district is Director Woodard and I sit down and go through negotiations with the employee group, with their designated team. Following, once we reach what's called a tentative agreement between the two teams, then the employee group takes a vote, and if that vote passes, it's called a ratification. And then at that point, that proposed agreement goes to our school board for final approval. The school board is, of course, included, however, through the entire process. They're updated. They provide the financial parameters for the for our negotiations team, and they will be obviously included in any type of staffing ratio discussion as well.
Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
My question was kind of similar. And with that, with the bargaining unit deciding testing, what does that mean? Does that mean if they decide we don't want to spend so many days doing testing, we'll no longer do maps, or we'll no longer do fast bridge, or what does that mean?
So with the READ Act, legislation says that we are required to use, in our particular case, we use fast bridge, right? So when it comes to our comprehensive literacy screening, that will need to continue. We know that the Minnesota comprehensive assessments are required by state law, so that will still have to continue. We use other assessments, right? So we capture data via Panorama for student social and emotional well-being. We capture that information. We capture, or will begin capturing, information starting with some schools and some grade levels for the cognitive abilities test, the COGAT, really looking at talent development and natural abilities. And so those pieces are negotiable. And we, as Director Saylor said, she, mostly her in this particular case, but Mark will be there as well, will continue to work with union leadership to negotiate those pieces. But when it comes to our literacy efforts, that is now a state statute with the READ Act. And so we will continue using FastBridge.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Sure.
I have a question about, so if you're able to recoup some of the funds that you've invested in letters, what is your plan to reinvest that in the school? Or do you have to give it back to the education fund, or do you work with them to create a new plan, or do you expand your training?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it will allow us to just continue to fund, but really those funds would come back, they'd go into the general fund. We actually have a plan. Like I said, we are so fortunate to just be in a really good position with this. So what READ Act says is that by next year, we need to have our primary teachers as well as interventionists trained. We have been in the position where we've been doing that training now, and actually our early childhood teachers as well. We've been working on that training now since 2021, so we're really in a good position. We don't know how much we're going to get reimbursed, but we do know that we are actually moving to begin, letters is primary, Aspire is for intermediate moving into secondary up to 8th grade. And so we're actually going to be moving into that training with some of our intermediate teachers. By 2027, teachers, early childhood through 8th grade, need to be trained. And again, we're just in a really good and unique position that we have so many of our teachers trained already. So those monies come back, we could certainly use that refund to go towards some other expenses. They will come back and go into the general fund though.
Okay, so they could go for anything, not necessarily just reading or literacy related.
Well, we know that we're committed to continuing our efforts, so, but when they come back in, they do go into the general fund.
Sarah, another question?
For 9th through 12th graders, is anything being done for those kids that have slid through? Can that funding go to bump their system up?
Reimbursement funding, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So, first of all, we actually, I'm just really proud, you can tell I'm really proud of the teaching and learning team, right? Because, they moved FastBridge into 9th grade already. And so we've already been using FastBridge in 9th grade. We've already, been able to support students with their reading and just really excited about what we're seeing with that. Teaching and learning is also brought to the board, for just initial review, our comprehensive 9th through 12th grade literacy plan. And once that is approved, then we're able to see, what we will need to do. We've actually added for this coming school year, we've actually added a reading course at the high school level. So this is a commitment that we already have. When it says that those funds go into the general fund, that's just because the funds came out of the general fund without specific funding being set aside for it. But we do plan to continue our comprehensive literacy and fund that as well.
Yes.
So it sounds like we have some really good things, money coming in, other things that are gonna require money going out. And I know that we'll see a fuller budget picture tomorrow or later. Overall, is it a net positive, or are people pleased with the outcome of the session? Or do you feel like there were maybe some misses of things we didn't get that we wanted?
That's a great question.
Really good question. First of all, just as superintendent, I'm never gonna say that I'm not excited that we now have 47.8% of the special education cross subsidy coming in.
That's a huge win.
That is a tremendous win, and that is something that our students were down there advocating for, and it made such a difference. We have additional unfunded mandates, and we won't know the true impact of those until 2026 for exposure, or every district won't know the impact of unemployment. So what happens with the new unemployment, it's also reimbursed, right? So we have to have money set aside to pay that out first,
Right.
and then we'll submit for reimbursement later. And so it's about cash flow, right? You have to have those monies so that you can set those aside. We won't know the impact with class sizes until we go through the negotiations. We have a class range, and if we went with the lowest numbers in our class range, it requires a significant number more of teachers, which requires significant more funding. And so we are incredibly excited for the cross subsidy. We're excited for 4%, 2%. We are really excited for the tie to general fund to inflation, because what that guarantees us is that we know we will get nothing less than 2%. There were years, I've been in education for a really long time, there were years where we got 0%. There were years where we actually, in education, gave back to the state to help them fund other things. And we will receive no more than 3%. The great thing is we can start to plan out and budget in a way that other businesses are able to do that, because we just never knew where we were going to be at.
That stabilization is the key to all of it, which was a priority.
When is the next negotiating period starting with the teachers?
It starts this summer.
Oh, wow, okay.
Questions?
Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a question. Do you have a mentorship program for your students on your board? As they go through, they can mentor the younger students to be leaders in that advocacy?
I think so. I think that that's our hope a lot for this coming school year. That's not a big effort. That is one of our big hopes for this coming school year, is we're seeing the importance of student voice on this committee, and the importance of making sure that we are continuing to grow this group and use our students as the ones to influence the school body, right? And to help shape what this looks like. So yes.
I'm sure there's such a learning curve too for the students who learn all the aspects of what you're trying to do.
What do
It
you
would be
guys
nice
think about
to
that?
keep passing that on to the new.
I would say definitely before being on the legislative action committee, I had no idea about like the status of education policy within Minnesota. And like being on the committee, it's definitely opened my eyes to show that like education, finance, and especially policy is extremely complicated. And I think it's like, it should be a necessity that everybody knows, and having like the new members and having mentor them would definitely mean that we're like having a more educated public, and we can like talk about these issues more and like explain it in like more lay terms, and it would just make more sense.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry. There definitely was a learning curve regarding, just following bills and speaking to representatives as well, just, putting everything in terms that you can understand, as well as when we had like younger students with us, especially making sure that they were, they understood what was going on, as well as speaking to the representatives and having that opportunity to voice their concern as well as support.
And it wasn't just our representatives in this district as well. They did a lot of outreach efforts for other people on the Education Finance Committee and those types of things that, so obviously we converse a lot with our representatives directly, but the overall committee structure, they did a lot of work with those folks as well. So that's a great exposure for them all.
And next year, we hope to have Director Woodard give us another class on education funding, because it's a complicated piece, and we think the more members of our community, the more students, the more everybody understands it, that we're all better off, so. Great. Well, if nobody has any other questions, we will adjourn this evening. Thank you so much for coming. Once again, we'd love it if you'd like to keep in touch with us at the LAC. We will be hosting our breakfast again next year. We'd love to have your name so we can reach out. So thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice, so much.
Of course.